Hello. I just want to share my thoughts on the books I've been reading in spring 2026. So March, no, not March. Yes, March, April, May. I'm probably going to spoil most of them because I want to talk about how I actually feel, and sometimes that involves revealing details of the story. So sorry about that. But the first book I read was Heaven by Mieko Kawakami. I think she released that in 2009, and it was translated into English by Sam Bett and David Boyd in 2022. I borrowed this book from my friend, so I was lucky enough to be able to read that. The premise of the book is that there are two high school students being bullied, and one is an unnamed 14-year-old boy who has a lazy eye, and this is the character that we see the story from his perspective. And the other character is a girl called Kojima who shows visible signs of poverty, basically. And they become friends and try to help each other through their tough time at school. I like this book because it did actually challenge me to think about my initial response to it. It raised questions for me that before I read it, I might have had probably a more hard stance on. Yeah, I am going to spoil the ending, sorry. But at first, I was kind of left with a bad taste in my mouth that the main character got surgery to correct his lazy eye at the end of the book. Like, I didn't want the book to be delivering the message that if you can, you should change yourself so that you're not mistreated. Especially when you're reading it as someone that has been mistreated for things that you literally can't change about yourself. But I tried to sort of interrogate that initial feeling and look at it more in the context of the story. And Kojima, the girl who is bullied, believed that the boy's lazy eye and her signs of being from a low-income family are inseparable from who they are as people. So much so that even when she becomes part of a wealthier family, or the boy finds out that he could correct his eye with a very simple and relatively cheap procedure, Kojima continues to deliberately not wash herself, and she wears dirty clothes in order for her to hold on to that identity. And she also then basically completely cuts off the boy for even suggesting that he would consider changing his lazy eye, and she tells him that he doesn't understand. Essentially, she believes that their suffering at the hands of the bullies has some kind of higher purpose or meaning, when in reality it doesn't have a purpose to it at all. And we learn for a fact that there's no purpose to the bullying because one of the bullies themselves, called Momose, literally gives this whole nihilistic monologue in which he tells the main character that there is no reason that they bully him. They don't even really care particularly that he has a lazy eye. They just like to assert their power, and the two characters are just easy, weak targets who basically just happen to be there at the wrong time. Yeah, it's kind of devastating, I guess, for the boy to be told that there is no meaning to what's happening to him. But in a way, it also frees him from just letting it happen. Not that people who are bullied are letting it happen to them, but in the story, the character doesn't tell anyone about the bullying. He doesn't tell his parents or teachers. He doesn't try to fight back in any way. Obviously, he shouldn't be being bullied, but the story makes it very clear that he's not really tried to do much about it other than just trying to avoid the bullies and hoping that they'll stop if he just does what they want him to. So given all of that, I think that the book is saying that there's nothing moral about enduring suffering for the sake of it. And I think that is why, in the end, he gets the procedure done. Not necessarily because he believes that there's something about him to be fixed. He did have the belief, he'd convinced himself that nothing could be done about it. And we found out later in the book that his mother had a lazy eye as well. So he associates that trait with her, and I can't remember if his mother passed away or something else happened, but she isn't in the picture, and he has a stepmother in the picture. And I think there's actually quite a hopeful end to the book because he does open up to his stepmom about the bullying, and she's supportive of him. There is a big scene in the end where all of the bullying kind of comes to a head, but after that, I think they're about to graduate the school or something. So already he's never going to see the bullies again. So he makes his decision to have the surgery done, kind of irrespective of the bullying. He makes that choice, not necessarily to avoid being bullied, because we know that he's not gonna see them again anyway. So I think the choice ended up not just being about escaping suffering, but about moving towards happiness, potentially. But yeah, I guess it just sat like not perfectly with me, because I mean, obviously my stance would always be that bullying shouldn't happen in the first place. Like, we should live in a world where people can be how they are and not be literally attacked for it. But does that mean that people should just experience bullying and put up with it because that's how they are, and not do anything to change themselves if that's something they want to do and if it's going to help or stop their suffering? I also don't believe that either. Like, I don't think someone should have to change something about themselves in order to not be mistreated, but I also don't think that it's moral for someone to put up with suffering just because of who they are. So yeah, I liked that it made me think about that. Then I read Heartburn by Nora Ephron. I believe that's from 1983. And I found this book in a charity shop, but I don't have it because I lent it to a friend. If a book is worth reading, share the love, guys. So it's about a food writer whose husband cheats on her and chooses to leave her in the middle of her pregnancy with their second child. And despite the fact that it is very 80s, like, there are things that are said in this book that were really uncomfortable, to be honest, to say the least. And I think in some of the cases, it probably is relating to the privileged, wealthy, high society New York perspective of the main character, not necessarily the actual views of the author. But honestly, I don't really know enough about that context to speak on it. But yeah, I don't know loads about Nora Ephron herself. But other than that, I really enjoyed reading the book. Like, it was very funny. The narrator's voice was so vivid. Like, I don't think I've ever read someone inject such personality and humor into a narrator so expertly, to be honest. She's very blunt and she says things that most people wouldn't dare to probably put in our stream of consciousness narration. But it's very funny to read, and it also makes it simultaneously heartbreaking, as I think a sense of humor can often be like a defense mechanism in the face of trauma or just something tragic happening in general. And to be honest, I think that it was an extremely iconic move from Nora Ephron to even write this book, considering she wrote it because she herself had ended up in the same situation as Rachel, the main character. She turned her pain into a heartfelt, hilarious story, and she was right for that. Then I read 3 Rooms by Jo Hamya, which came out in 2021. It's about an Oxford master's graduate who moves to London to work for a magazine, and there's a lot of reflection on the state of the UK and the idea of having a room of one's own. I picked this up randomly at the library, like I just came across it on the shelf, and I'm genuinely so sorry to this book, but I'm so glad I finished it, because I was literally reading it forever and I was dying for it to be over, which is kind of sad because I feel like I should have enjoyed it, because it is set in 2018, 2019 with the explicit context of Brexit, Grenfell, the Tories coming back into power. It's about a character that lives in Oxford and feels like an outsider, which I was literally doing in 2019. It's about a young person trying to be politically aware but not being very politically active, and about someone trying to take control over their life but feeling very little control over anything. And I feel like these are all things that young people in the UK today, like, these are all things that we're all kind of facing and feeling and thinking about. And I got all of those themes from the book, but I just didn't really connect with the story at all, to be honest. Like, it just wasn't an enjoyable read for me. And I'm sorry, I wanted to like it, but, you know, things aren't for everyone, and that's okay. Then I read Nightbitch by Rachel Yoder from 2021 again. I borrowed this book from a friend. She had, like, the beautiful copy with the canine teeth-bearing mouth, and I did really enjoy this book. I just didn't get super crazy invested page-turner kind of vibes. I did wish that there was a bit more to the plot itself, but I did actually enjoy the writing style. Like, it felt very witty and satirical. I remember my friend, like, kind of warned me that the writing style might not be for me when she gave me the book, but I liked it. And I also liked that the husband wasn't demonized by the end of the book. It was actually about them coming together and communicating rather than falling into the roles that they felt like they had to, which is what they were doing and what was leading to this kind of disconnect between them and the care giving to their child. But it was very cool that her rage was essentially performance art by the end of the book as well. Like, I thought that was a really nice way of looking at it. Like, at first the character thought that leaning into the wolf was a step away from art, but it was actually a step towards it in the end. So yeah, I really appreciated that, her like leaning into the wolf side of her, which is, I guess, essentially just her leaning into her fucking feelings, and her not being a complete machine made her a better parent and made her a better artist and made her a better partner. So yeah, I liked that message, I guess, of the book. But yeah, I just think the plot maybe could have had a bit more going on. Then I read The Vegetarian by Kang. I believe the entire book was released in 2007, but it had been released before as mini books, like each chapter was its own novella, I guess. So maybe it was written like before then, but I think 2007 was the finalized book release in Korean, and then it was translated to English by Deborah Smith in 2015. And this is another book I borrowed from the library, and I wanted to read it for ages, so I'm very glad that I finally did. And the story is about a woman who chooses to become vegetarian, and everyone around her reacts like insane people, basically. I really resonated with the book because, to me, at the time that I read it, it spoke to the kind of body keeps the score idea in relation to trauma, and there was a big theme of female rebellion. And for me, it spoke about also the idea of boundaries as well. But I feel like I probably just projected a lot of my own life and what I was thinking about at the time onto the story as I was reading it, to be honest. But yeah, that was what I took away. I actually really liked that we never hear from Young Hye, the main character, who is the vegetarian. And we only ever hear the perspectives of the other people in her life, because for me, that really spoke to her complete lack of voice in her own life and how nobody respects her as a person in all of this, to the point that she doesn't even want to be a person anymore. She wants to be a plant or a tree. The imagery was very vivid, which was lovely, but it was a very dark book, like hard to read at parts. I would maybe look up some content warnings if you are someone that can be affected by reading about certain things. So I definitely needed a lighter read after this one, which is absolutely what I went for. The next book that I read was What You Are Looking For Is in the Library by Michiko Aoyama, which was published in Japanese in 2021 and then translated to English by Alison Watts in 2023. Sadly, I didn't borrow it from the library, but I found it in a charity shop, so close enough, hey? But the book is about 5 different characters who all live in the same area, and they have some kind of problem in their life that they're feeling dissatisfied with or they need to solve, and all of them, for all different reasons, end up visiting the library in their area, where the librarian, I think her name was Sayuri Komachi, recommends them some books, and that ends up helping them along their journey in ways that they couldn't have expected. I kind of loved this book, honestly. I don't think it's perfect. Like, there were certain attitudes that definitely could have been more challenged, as well as sometimes the lessons were a little on the nose, especially in the first chapter, where like the character goes to the community center and she literally goes, wow, I didn't know all of these things in my local community center are here and it's all for free, which was kind of hilarious. But honestly, she's right for that. Like, I don't think most people are remotely aware of the extent of free or low cost things that their local community offers. So yeah, I'll forgive that. I forgive that one. And once you get used to the style of how it's written anyway, it's actually really refreshing to have something that's just easy to read and it just says what it means, which is nice. I really needed something that was just simple to follow and therefore like easy to get invested in, and this was exactly that. It was also nice how each story got slightly more complex or abstract in the problems that it was solving to the characters, to the point that the last one felt like quite of an existential problem, like compared to the first one. I would say it really spoke to the fact that we are always learning new and different lessons at so many stages of our lives. And I loved, of course, that this book spoke to the power of literature, libraries, and yeah, even more so than anything, community and people and connection. It was very wholesome, and yeah, I would really recommend it. Yay! So that's everything. I don't think I read as much as I did in winter, but that's what I got. At the moment, I'm reading James Baldwin's novel, Go Tell It on the Mountain. Oh, I just devour his writing. I find with classics, I'm just like lost, like don't understand, can't follow what's going on. But I love his writing. I'm loving reading from him again. I read Giovanni's Room first like a few months ago, and now I'm like, time to gobble up all of his work. My least favourite thing of the week is that I pulled my hamstring. So I've just been like hobbling about for a couple weeks, which is a little bit frustrating. But my favourite thing of the week is that because Paul McCartney has released a new album, which I have listened to and I do really like. My favourite songs are As You Lie There, Mountaintop, Days We Left Behind, Salesman Saint. I also love that there's a duet with Ringo on there. Like, that's beautiful. The first ever Paul Ringo duet. And I do have a soft spot for Ringo because I was obsessed with Thomas the Tank Engine show when I was a toddler. And I even named my cat Thomas after Thomas the Tank Engine. And real ones will know that Ringo Starr was the first narrator of Thomas the Tank Engine. So his voice is very nostalgic for me because I used to watch any and every and all seasons of Thomas the Tank Engine. But what was even more exciting than the music itself for me is that, of course, new album, new press, and unbelievably, guys, we got Paul McCartney chicken shop date. Do not walk, run to that video. Trust me, it's pure gold. Okay, thank you so much. That's all I have to say. Take care. Have a good day. Goodbye.